Welcome to Workplace Wake Up, your go-to podcast for practical employment law guidance. I'm Jennifer Shaw, the founder of Shaw Law Group, and I'm here to help HR professionals and leaders navigate the legal minefield of the modern workplace. Each week, we tackle real-world issues with clear advice and a little tough love. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. A quick reminder, if you haven't registered for the February 11th, 2026 Employer's Lawyer Complimentary California Legal Update, now is the time. During the 1-hour live webinar, we will discuss the key laws and court decisions you need to know for 2026. You will also learn about how Employer's Lawyer functions as an all-in-one platform designed to support HR professionals with prevention-focused, informed decision-making. You can register at employerslawyer.com. Now, let's focus on today's podcast topic. Employee handbooks. Okay, everybody gets frustrated when I say this. I guess I shouldn't say everybody, but many of you. When I say you need to update your handbook every year, okay? That doesn't mean you need to spend $10,000 to get your handbook updated every year. In fact, Julia Insel and I, she is our handbook guru in the firm. She and I laugh all the time when clients call and say, oh, well, our other law firm said it would be $10,000 to revise this handbook. What are you talking about? That's crazy talk. No, we stay on top of the developments all year long. We can do it very quickly, but you don't even need a lawyer to do it, okay? You can do it yourself. You just have to do it. You have to have a handbook that is compliant. It is a huge risk for you when your handbook contains outdated information, especially, of course, when the law has changed. But even when it's not the law that's changed, it's just your practices, right? You don't want to be saying you're doing something that you don't do. And I think what happens is that we get so busy as employers, and I know this happens in my own firm, we get so busy that we forget about the basics. And one of the basics is getting a new handbook out to our employees every single year. I don't care if it's January 1st, January 15th, or today, January 28th, right? But please, you've got to send updated handbooks. You've got to make sure that you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's. So let's talk about this in a little more detail. Why do handbooks matter so much in California? It's very simple. They are often, almost always, Exhibit A in litigation, right? Plaintiffs' lawyers will use outdated policies in your handbook to undermine whatever defenses your litigation lawyers are trying to use, right? So you might say, oh, well, I fired this person because they had poor performance. And the plaintiff's lawyer says, well, your handbook says you give quarterly evaluations. Did you do that for Matilda? Well, we got very busy. Oh, so you didn't do that for Matilda. So you fired Matilda without following your own procedures. Okay, you see where I'm going? All right. Also, of course, enforcement agencies like the Civil Rights Department, the Labor Commissioner, the EEOC, they want your policies to be up to date. And they don't give you wiggle room. They don't say, well, the new law became effective January 1, but heck, we'll give you till July 15th to get it done. It doesn't work that way. Now, some things like the Know Your Rights notice, they've given us till the 1st of February, right? So that's coming up in a few days. But most of these new laws were effective January 1. Now, for 2026, we didn't have a ton of laws that changed what you need to say in your handbooks. Very few, actually. So this is a great year to update them. If you haven't done an update in a while, you're going to want to do it this year. Okay, get it done as soon as you possibly can. The bottom line is every single year, the California legislature changes the law, and their laws relating to wage and hour, leave of absence, workplace policies, confidentiality. This year, of course, it was stay or play agreements, all kinds of things. And then we have local municipalities, cities and counties and special districts that over the past several years, since the implementation of the Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act sick leave, they have gotten into the game of annual legal changes, right, that affect the workplace. And then, of course, we have court decisions that are retroactive, right? For the most part, court decisions are focused on the fact that there was a law. And the question is, did the employer follow the law appropriately? And if they decide we didn't, that is a retroactive decision, right? It's not going forward. The court is saying this is how you should have been doing it all along, all right? So there are a lot of different things that can change that are going to impact your employee handbook. Now, there are a couple of common things we see in many of the handbooks we review, which I think might be helpful for you to think about. First of all, at-will policies. Okay, if you're a public sector employer, your at-will employees are the ones who haven't passed probation, right? So for the most part, in the public sector, once somebody completes their probationary period, unless they're in, let's say, like a career executive assignment with the state, they have a property interest in their job, all right? So they're not at will. But those of you in the private sector, most of you, even if you have unions, many of you still have at-will policies, you describe them differently in different places, okay? So you might say in your at-will policy in your handbook that only the president can change the at-will language, but then you have some other incentive policy where you say, well, the manager can change anything in this plan, and the plan contains an at-will employment law provision. Now you have different provisions. You have policies and practices that are in contradiction with one another. So your at-will policy should say, you are an at-will employee. That means we can change the terms and conditions of your employment and end your employment for any reason, with or without notice or cause, at any time. And it means you can do the same thing, right? And it doesn't have to be fancy or long. In fact, it's better if it's short and direct, but you just want to have something, and you want to make sure that you use that same language in your offer letter, in your incentive plan, in your handbook, all right? Another issue we see a lot are outdated leave policies. So for example, you don't mention designated person in your paid sick leave, or you don't reflect in your paid family leave policy that it's actually not leave, it's actually wage replacement benefits. So when you have outdated leave policies, and of course we talked about that last week, you're creating a huge problem for yourselves. Get those updated in your handbook. Arbitration agreements, okay, a source of huge litigation in California. Are they a good idea? Yes, they often can be a very good idea, but they have to be written appropriately. You have to make sure you update them to account for recent court decisions. There are other things that you talk about in your handbook. By the way, remember, the arbitration agreement doesn't belong in the handbook. Okay, we're talking about it as an issue that comes up with handbooks because many of you include an arbitration provision in your handbook. You have to have a standalone arbitration agreement. Now, if you want to say in your handbook, to remedy disputes between you and the company, we've adopted an arbitration procedure that we think is fair and efficient, and you'll be given a copy of an arbitration agreement when you're hired and when we update it. You can do that, okay? But you can't put the actual agreement in your handbook. Expense reimbursement. Make sure you don't say anything crazy like, if you're an exempt employee, you don't get reimbursed for mileage. Exempt employees get reimbursed for mileage, folks, not for their time, but they do for mileage. We've seen that actually pretty frequently lately, and I don't know if that's because there's some model handbook out there that's got it wrong, but it's a problem. Remote work, okay? If you're going to describe how you handle remote and hybrid work in your handbook, it needs to be accurate and consistent with any agreement you have the employee sign. If you're in multi-state locations, you don't just have California locations, you've got to have appropriate separate policies and procedures for those other locations. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all. I know a lot of us think California is the most strict jurisdiction, but we're not on everything. So if you just say we're going to follow California law for everything, you're going to have a problem with, for example, Nevada overtime. For non-exempt employees, you're not going to necessarily be doing that correctly. So you won't be dealing with Massachusetts small necessities leave, okay, which is a special leave of absence in Massachusetts. if you have multi-state locations, you've got to figure out a way to deal with that with your handbook. So if you don't do these updates annually, you're going to have increased exposure in wrongful termination, retaliation, wage hour cases. You can potentially lose key defenses because you don't have the policies to back them up. And then, of course, you have credibility issues with judges, with juries, with agencies. If you show up to a labor commissioner hearing with a handbook from 2014, what are they going to think? You don't know what you're doing, right? They're going to think you're not taking care of business. You haven't done what you need to do. So I want you to really understand the importance. Is some of it perception? Yes. Just because you haven't updated your handbook since 2014 doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing, right? It just means you've been busy. But an outsider, someone from an agency, can look at that and think, this employer must have some other problems. I think I better turn some rocks over and see what I can find. All right. So the credibility issues, that's important. And I've literally been participating in a mediation, for example, with the Civil Rights Department, where we give a policy that's an updated current year policy, and the consultant will say, oh, great job on the policy. We have so many employers who come in here and don't have things updated. And it gives them a sense that the employer cares about what they're doing and treats the employees the way they should. So it's really important. So what are your best practices for your handbooks? Okay. First of all, what you really need to look at updating are the policies that are driven by the law. So leaves of absence, wage hour, expenses, that sort of thing. If you have a special policy on performance evaluations and you don't want to review that every year, I don't care, as long as you're doing it in a way that is consistent with the policy. In other words, as long as your practice follows your policy, that's fine. So any of these policies, you know, how tidy they should keep their desk and how you're going to handle a holiday party or what you want to do for attendance at conferences, as long as you're complying with the law and you're just adding things that are organizationally focused or driven, that's okay. You don't have to update those. But you've got to make sure that anything that is based on the law, on a requirement, is updated. When you update your handbook, issue a new acknowledgement. You want your employees to acknowledge the new version of the handbook. Most of us do this electronically, right? You have the handbook posted on your intranet. You send an email and you tell them that there's a new version they should look at. Some of you might have a summary of what the changes are. You're not required to do that, but it could be a good thing. Some of you may just have separate policies posted on your intranet. So as you update a policy, you replace the old one with the new one. Do it however you want. Just make sure that you're getting acknowledgement, that people understand that there's something new there. And of course, that you train everybody on the new content, on the new substantive content. All right. So that is what I want you to think about when you're doing your employee handbooks. By the way, they don't need to be 60 pages long. They should have a footer at the bottom that says when they were updated. It can even be revised date, 1/1/2026, something so that you can tell when you are providing documents to an employee or to opposing counsel that this is the 2026 version of your policy, right? That can be super helpful. And folks, this doesn't have to be hard. If you do this every year and you just follow, like Shaw Law Group, we will tell you every year what your updates are that you need. You can do this where you just look at our blog, right? You just listen to the podcast. We'll tell you what needs to be updated. You don't have to make this a big deal. But if you wait 5 years and you haven't done the updates from 5 years ago, that's tough, okay? So let this be your year, because there are very few mandated updates. In fact, just a couple. Let this be the year that you get it fully compliant and up to date for 2026. And then in November of every year, you update it and you roll that baby out January 1 of the new year. And then you are rock solid. You at least have your policies and procedures, and your Exhibit A in the lawsuit is going to be solid. All right? Everybody, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you go out and have a wonderful day. Do something nice for someone. Thank you again for all your support. We love having you here. And don't forget to register on the Employer's Lawyer website. All right, talk to you next time, everybody. Thanks so much. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Workplace Wake Up. If you found today's discussion helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your HR and leadership teams. For more insights, training programs, and legal updates, you can visit us at shawlawgroup.com.